ISO 13485, it's really trending these days. People are talking about what is it, how do I get it, what is a quality system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We want to talk today about how ISO 13485, the quality standard, international quality standard, relates to the FDA. And this has been a topic of discussion for years, but it's actually gotten a little bit more traction starting at the beginning of 2022. But first of all, what is ISO 13485? And for that matter, what is this thing that we like to call 21 CFR 820? Well, ISO 1345 is an international consensus standard, right? It's voluntary. No one is going to make you follow. It's not quite true, but that's the principle behind it. 21 CFR 820 Code of Federal Regulations is actually ensconced into U.S. law. So one is an international consensus standard. The other is U.S. law. What aren't they? This is important. Neither one of them represents a clearance of a medical device. Neither one of them represents your design of your medical device. While they have more often to do with manufacturing, although they do have to do with design, it doesn't represent that you're successful at manufacturing. What are they? Well, ultimately, each one of these is an auditable process. You're basically saying, look, I planned what I was going to do. I did it. And now I can prove it to you that this is what I did. That makes it auditable. Audible means you can hear it. Auditable means somebody can walk in, they can ask you for objective evidence, documents, and then they can see if you're planning, doing, and then documenting that you did it. These are similar in principle to ISO 9001. Many times driving down a highway, you'll see a factory with ISO 9001, a flag flying outside. It's just saying we can do what we say we can do. For the purposes for which we exist, we have the ability to plan, do, and then prove that we did it. Now, like I said, one of these is a certification that you can get from a notified body delegated by a competent authority. Most of these are coming out of Europe. The other is just a law. You can't get a certification to 21 CFR 820. That doesn't really matter that much, but I will say that a lot of times companies will advertise and say, oh, we have ISO 13485, or we're FDA registered, so therefore you don't need to worry about quality systems. And the reality is, nothing could be further from the truth. In the FDA's eyes, quality systems are the responsibility of the company that's putting the device on the market. You need to comply with what you need to comply with. Now you can have others help you in that process. And perhaps if a vendor has a certification to 13485, they might be able to leverage that to help you. We're going to talk about how 13485 plays in the US system today, but I just want to make that point up front that having these things by a vendor does not automatically make you, if you're a medical device startup, does not make you compliant. It's something that has to be leveraged and used. So what are the kinds of areas that are covered by these sorts of standards or regulations? Well, it's things like how you run your company, the management aspects of the company, how you audit your company, how you train employees, how you design and develop a product, how you maintain your documents, how you run your purchasing controls for what you're going to build, how you know whether to accept or reject parts and subsystems and systems that are coming through your assembly process. How do you do installation and qualification of installation? The list goes on and on and on through all the things you need to think about for how you run your company, how you maintain your company, how you design, document, manufacture, all of that. And it's the kind of thing that is important to follow, even if you don't have such a certification. You do need to think about these kinds of things, really, even if you're doing a Class 1 device that doesn't require quality systems compliance. But ultimately, if you are required to have it and do it, it's so that somebody in authority can audit you. Our focus here is US FDA. So in either case, the question is, how is US FDA going to audit me? And what's all the fuss? Why talk about two different standards? Well, that's exactly the question. Why talk about two different standards? That's ridiculous. Why should I have to comply with ISO 13485 and 21 CFR 820? They're subtly different. That means that if I say I have a quality management system, I now have to do work to make it compliant to 1345 and to 820. Who would ever require that? Well, it turns out no one's actually requiring you, no one entity is requiring you to be compliant to both of those. But if you want to sell in Europe, 1345 is ubiquitous. And if you want to sell in the US, 820 is. So in reality, most international medical device companies are functionally required to comply with both, to go through all of the work of complying with both. Fortunately, there is this thing called the MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, which at least tries to streamline the auditing of that. But for years, FDA has wanted to go further. They've wanted really to chuck 820 and to adopt 1345 to be in keeping with the rest of the world, because it's not a bad standard. But they can't really legally do that. They can't just toss 820 out the window. So what's the solution to this? Well, the solution to this looks something like incorporation. And I want to show you something here. This from the Johnner Institute. And credit where credit is due, Dr. Christian Johnner has a whole article on this. But I love this very, very simple graphic right here. The planned amendments, this is as of early 2022. It's been nearly 2 years. We'll talk about this later. The FDA has largely decided to gut 820 and add a reference to 1345. Incorporation by reference. In other words, the old 820 looks like what's on the left, and the new 820 rips a bunch out and then places 1345 in. The goal there would be to obsolete certain parts of 820 because they're contained in 1345. So they're not going to rip 820 entirely out. You still have to comply with it, but it is changing. And by complying with 1345, you're going to get an awful lot of credit, and parts of 820 would be removed. There's a presentation from the FDA as of a few years ago by Karen Massley-Joseph. We won't go through the whole thing, but it's a very interesting presentation covering the same material. She notes that on February 23rd is when FDA published their proposed amendments to 21 CFR 820 here. Most of it would be incorporation by reference, as Dr. Johnner said, and the public comment period is now closed. That was closed in May of 2022. So the idea, like we said a minute ago, pull out most of 820, incorporate by reference ISO 1345. And you can see here in this table, well, if the requirements are substantively similar, then couldn't we just use 1345? Or if there's things that we do need to address, we'll have parts of 820 that still exist to be able to reference those. In other words, we'll keep the things in green and address the differences, but the other parts will just reference 1345. And that sounds really good. A lot of cool things in this document. But I think that the real issue here that we have not seen action on, one of these documents mentioned that December 2023 is when the Office of Management and Budget, we're done with that document, Office of Management and Budget at FDA said December 2023 is when this should all be implemented. Well, it's October, and search as I might, I still don't see that we're ready to make that change yet. And of course, this has been years in coming. FDA has been wrestling because it would take an act of Congress to make certain types of changes in this. and we continue to wait. So for the moment, this is definitely something that is still a have to do both. Benefit from MD-SAP when you can. But for those who are interested in, does 13485 cover me? Do I have to get that? The answer right now is still no. 820 is what you're complying to in the U.S. That being said, if this does go into an effect, when it does, FDA is not saying you have to get a 13485 certification. I found that fascinating. They're saying you have to comply with it, but just like 820, they weren't actually expecting a certification. And so if this goes through, while for Europe you would be getting audited to 13485 and getting a certification from a notified body, which is perfectly nice and perfectly helpful, FDA, as of late, has been saying you don't actually need that certification. You just have to comply with the standard. So we'll see how that all pans out. The hope is that that maybe something like that finally, after decades, does come through. But time will tell, so stay tuned on that. If you like what you hear today, please like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Send, as we did this week, got a wonderful comment from a listener asking some specific questions. Feel free. Contact at medtechcrossroads.com. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know. And as always, we hope that the time that you spend on MedTech Crossroads really saves you time in your MedTech product development journey.